Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar. My name is Alex Charge. I head up the Clinical Solutions Business Unit here at Real Chemistry. A quick introduction, I won't take up too much time as we have an absolutely fantastic lineup of speakers here to discuss this important topic from all angles needed. And I can talk about this non-stop, as those who know me probably can attest to. But so what do we mean by rehumanizing clinical trials, clinical research? There is a patient drive happening right now about humanizing healthcare, but all the points put forward are just as important in the clinical trial space, if not even more so in this space. Compassion, empathy, focus on knowledge and empowerment through health, data and digital literacy, respect for commitment and contribution. The key is to working with patients holistically within the whole ecosystem of their lives, and not just through the one medical lens of their disease, if we are ever to break the trial trust challenge holding back success for our industry. We in pharma work in the business of humans, for, by, and with humans, and health is the most precious commodity for human beings. Therefore, the people that we serve, and I'm not saying that word lightly, serve, patients, are a key partner to our success, and all aspects that matter to them need to be fully understood. And with that, we need to ensure how we operate is radically transformed to ensure we put forward patients at the center of how we design and conduct our business model. And I say business model holistically in pharma, not just clinical trials. It's an official commitment to looking at patients as diverse human beings. Therefore, if our trials don't work for all the people that they should do for, we simply haven't reached our goal. And it's one step on from listening, okay? So it's called human-centered design. It's an ethos as well as a methodology, and it's our commitment and our call to action moving forward. So I do hope you enjoy our webinar, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rosemary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex, and hello everyone. I am delighted to join discussions today as to getting real about rehumanizing clinical trial experience. Just a bit about me. My name is Rosemary Lakeru. I am a patient recruitment and retention specialist for over 10 years now. And, you know, to be honest, I'm very happy to see a lot of the efforts that have been made to improve the clinical trial experience, especially over the last couple of years. But I have had the opportunity to support pharma and CROs in developing strategic people-led outreach and engagement tactics, as well as what I believe is the privilege of servicing everyday people who happen to be patients, and really learning and translating real-world data into insightful, intelligent, community-led solutions. I always say we are in the business of people, so it's very important, of course, to identify where people are, but also taking it that further step forward, that one step more to meeting people where they are and learning what motivates us all to take actions. And I would think that we all agree here, you know, the aim is to strive for a world where all medical products adequately reflect the demographic representation of people whom the products are intended for. So having said this, I would like to start our discussions and introduce you all to our panelists. Joining us today, Dr. Liz O'Riordan. She's an oncology surgeon and breast cancer patient. Hello, Liz.
Hi.
Hi. We have David Gillen, the Pharmaceutical Chief Medical Officer.
Hello.
Hello. Emma Sutcliffe, Patient Engagement Executive. Hi, Emma.
Hi, everyone.
And Erica Henninger, Marketing and Advertising Executive. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us all today. So to just kick things off really and get things started, very excited, I'm going to start off with the first question of the day. And this is really for yourself, Liz, and David. And I want to understand, particularly Liz actually, what aspect of the pharma clinical trial model at present, especially around patient awareness and engagement, that you see as broken, almost critical to solve and address at this current time. especially given your perspective as, you know, both a HCP and a patient. And maybe in addition to that, has your experience changed your viewpoint on this topic at the moment? Liz, would you start us off?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think as a breast surgeon, I only knew about the trials that my own unit offered. And in a small hospital in rural Suffolk, we were very, very limited to what we could offer. And then when I became a patient, and especially when I got breast cancer again, I had a local recurrence, I wanted to know, are there trials that could help me? And I, as a consultant breast surgeon, did not know where to go to look to find that information. I knew my oncologist wouldn't know because they didn't do trials in the hospital I was being treated. And I was suddenly looking online, trying to find one database that would tell me all the trials available for me. There's some on CR UK, there are some on other websites, but it's really hard work. And I had no idea. And I realized what is offered to me as a patient depends on where I'm treated. If I was be lucky enough to live near the Marsden or the Christie, I'd have probably very different care from a trial point of view compared to my patients who live close to Great Yarmouth, for example, where you just don't have that access. And when I did find a trial, because it's really important when you've had cancer and it's come back, when you are on the metastatic treatment lines, if you're given the wrong treatment first, it may exclude you going into other trials. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't ruining my chances of things in the future. And the guilt I felt in going to my own oncologist and saying, I found a trial, do you think this could help me? I felt guilty suggesting that I knew more than her, wasting her time. And that's me as a consultant talking to another consultant. It is really, really hard with that power balance in the room. But patients are talking to each other. They are streaming conferences through Twitter, through Instagram. They know what's available. They will often know more than the doctors. And it's almost helping redress that power balance. So all the information is shared, just so patients can get the right treatment at the right time.
Absolutely, Liz.
I was going to say one more thing. I think when I was considering trials, and there was a trial about aspirin, looking to see whether that would reduce the risk of recurrence, I knew a lot of women who said, sod the trial, I'm just going to buy aspirin. And patients don't understand that trials are not to help them, they're normally to help patients in the future.
Absolutely.
And that's a big thing that so many people don't get.
Absolutely, and that is so profound. I can admit as well, Liz, that I've been in a similar situation and have asked my healthcare provider about clinical trials, and their responses has been quite interesting. From my experience, it wasn't that they didn't particularly want to talk about it, they didn't know how to, and was concerned that if they did talk about it, it could cause, you know, problems later for the patient, which I think will be really good, actually, David, to get your perspective on this question. So what do you think is really critical to solve and address at the moment as it pertains to the current clinical trial model?
I think what Liz has just said is as you say, very profound and incredibly appropriate in terms of the challenge of clinical trials. In a previous life, I was a medical director of the UK for a big pharmaceutical company, and I spent my life internally inside the company fighting for more clinical trial patients in the UK, and externally trying to talk to hospitals around the UK to try and get them to be more effective and efficient at doing trials in terms of patient recruitment speed. And that was the best job of my life, to be honest, in the industry side of medicine, because I felt like I had to be an advocate for the community of oncology and many other areas in the UK, externally and also inside the company. And I also had to try and work with the hospitals in the UK to try and improve their understanding of what was important for us in industry. I have to be honest, at that point, this is a few years ago, we never talked directly about the patients. We talked about the numbers and the speed and the time. And I think, you know, whilst that is always going to be a reality, I'm afraid, I think that, thank God, there is a definite move within the industry, but also within the healthcare environment, because that's one of the issues we should talk about perhaps, is the sort of the paternalistic way that Liz has mentioned, and the paternalistic model of healthcare, which the pharmaceutical industry is a part of, to be honest. And that's something we're having to break down and improve. But what we're trying to do now, what we should be trying to do now is think about patient-focused drug development. We have increasingly, because of science, rare disease medicine. Most diseases, including breast cancer, are becoming subtypes are becoming rare because of the knowledge we understand now on the genetics of many conditions. There is definitely a smaller population of patients who have that particular type of whatever that may be, and therefore, as Liz has mentioned, they have huge knowledge of their disease, but also of what that means. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, later on in the podcast. We can learn a lot and learn a lot more. But in terms of the thing that's broken, I think it is all the things that Liz talked about, is the lack of awareness. And I'm just going to put my hat on again and think the UK medical director, I was lobbying headquarters, but I was competing with other countries in Europe to get a finite number of patients potentially into the trial. That's something that's just a reality, and I think that continues to be. But what I think we need to do in the future is really understand it more from the patient's perspective. Patients want to be in trials. Patients don't understand necessarily all that's involved, but 75% of patients will tell you on some scales that they would want to be involved. And I think, post-pandemic, post-COVID, we really have an opportunity here to try and improve that, because I think it was the first time in my career that I've seen the positivity of being involved in clinical trials on mainstream television, and the value that was bringing to the wider society, as Liz said. And I think the value of a clinical trial is for the future, but it is also, and there's good data on this, it is for the present as well. The patients in a clinical trial, particularly proven in oncology, but in my area, cardiovascular disease as well, have been shown to do better than those who are not in a clinical trial. So we should be making clinical trial level medicine core to medicine in general, and we also need to make the patient key. And the way we can do that better is communicate better, communicate clearer, communicate more consistently, but also at the right level, avoiding jargon, to patients, to patient organizations, and to doctors. Because as Liz has said, one of the major challenges, and again, thank goodness now we have technology, which we'll maybe talk about later, which is going to change this, I think. We've always had to be centralizing trials. So geography has been a challenge. If you happen to live in Great Yarmouth compared to west of London, then you have a disadvantage potentially. But why should that be the case when we now have multiple trials running with wearable technology, which means you don't need to be you can stay in Great Yarmouth. You don't even need to come to London, which would have been a problem in the past. The patients coming from Great Yarmouth to London for these meetings. So I think that the points that Liz made are absolutely key there. And the other thing that we should talk about later is this trying to break down that paternalistic model that we are part of in the industry with the rest of the medical community.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. And there's so many things that you said there that's key. I completely agree with you. Lack of awareness is still an issue. The amount of people that I still talk to now who don't really know as much as I would like or expect people to know, especially in 2022 about clinical trials, it still surprises me. And yes, we need this patient-centric model that we all go. And this really helps me segue into my next question. And that is, we've seen there is a movement, as you mentioned, David, with COVID, especially the recent killings of George Floyd in the United States, Black Lives Movement, so many things. We've seen a shift in pharma to really push and take action. And this commitment to patient centricity and increasing diversity in clinical trials. But I want to know, as a patient, and through those that you support in your network, Liz, what is the reality? What really is the reality of your experience, and what is required to make this more tangible and just more practical for patients? And we say patients, but once again, it's everyday people who happen to be patients.
Exactly. It all comes down to patient recruitment and communication, and every patient should be in a trial. But what I want to do is tell you a story of how, as a doctor, I used to recruit patients. Say you come to see me with a breast cyst, and I have to say, I'm really sorry, it's breast cancer. And that news comes out of the blue, you are not expecting it. And whilst your head is reeling going, she said, I've got cancer, I'm saying, well, you need to have a mastectomy, and I've got 10 minutes, and I have to talk to you about reconstruction options and mention that you might need chemotherapy, you might need radiotherapy, you need to have your ovaries removed to make you menopausal. Can I put you in the diary for 2 weeks to have the operation? And you're still going, I've got cancer. And then I say, but there are 3 trials I want to talk to you about. We've got one using this new surgical tool, then there's another gene testing thing, there's another trial. There are 3 research nurses waiting outside who are going to sit and give you more information about all of those trials so we can get you signed up now. And you're going, flipping heck, I've got cancer. I want to run and scream. It's too much to take in. I don't understand anything, but they can't, because we don't have the time as healthcare professionals to bring patients back. It is a hell of a lot of information. And when is the right time? Can we do it virtually to say, right, here's some information. We'll get someone to call you and talk through it when a patient has had time for that news to sink in. Because the doctor knows what's happening. We've been talking about it all morning, but to them, they're going, blooming heck, what do I do? And often they'll just say yes, because they want to get out of there. And I think it's really important how we consider patients are recruited at what time of their journey. The traveling is really hard. You can have virtual appointments and consenting, but when you need more blood tests, you need more scans. It's onerous when you're having cancer treatment to have that extra traveling, that mileage of parking going by alone. And it's almost worse when the trial stops, because you've been cosseted in a blanket of regular follow-ups and tests and talks. You've had much more input. And when it stops, you feel lost, much more lost than patients who haven't been in a trial, because suddenly all that support has been taken away. And I think the aftercare is something really important. And finally, I just want to talk about the metastatic community, because they are dying much more quickly than trials are coming out. And it's really complicated with cancer, because as David said, so many different types and subtypes and resistances. It's hard to get one trial for everybody. And there are women paying £5,000–10,000 a month to get drugs that are off trial because they know they will work, because they slip through the cancer drug fund or the keyhole, and it is breaking people. And I'd love if we could find a way of just thinking, these people may have 6 months left to live. Why does it take 10 years to get things through? How can you help get trials to patients quicker to actually help these people who want to be around to see their families? I'm going to stop there before I carry on ranting.
No, absolutely. That's brilliant. Thank you. And to add to all of that, there's been the FDA has taken some important steps recently in terms of this new draft guidance to increase the racial and ethnic diversity in clinical trials of that as well. I mean, in the UK here, the NIHR, they've published a framework to promote race, equality and public involvement in research, which I think it's really, really key. But, it always stems back to everyday people, and there's this lack of trust that's still an issue in engaging in clinical trials. So I think we still have a way to go in communicating. David, you said it well, the communication is a skill, but it's key into really, as I say, meeting people where they are. Which takes me into
communication. It is the communication, but it's also, I think Liz has already said this, but it's the ongoing helpline type of discussion that you want. We can work on the communication to improve the awareness, and we can work on the communication even perhaps jargon free at the beginning of a trial, but there needs to be ongoing support for the patients on their journey with their disease, but during their journey of their clinical trial. And that's something I think we can certainly improve. And again, I think with technology that will be helpful. That will help them stay in the trial, but it will help them feel what they want to feel, which is a partner to this. They don't want to feel like a guinea pig. They want to feel like partners. Sorry, Liz.
No, and off the back of that, electronic notes is coming. Most hospitals have them, but we don't all use the same thing. We can't all talk to each other. It's like a Mac and a PC can't talk. And if you are on a trial having a drug in London, but you live in Birmingham and you end up in your local hospital in Birmingham, they haven't got a clue about the trial. They can't see your notes. They can't talk to the oncology nurse because she's gone home, and patients are left thinking, have I got to drive to London every time I get ill? So actually making their records easily available for any doctor in any hospital to see is vitally important, because they just feel, and as a doctor looking after these patients, I don't know what drug you're on. It's a series of numbers. I don't know how to treat you. Really, really hard, because patients don't remember to bring in all the information when they're sick because they're sick.
Yeah, and this is a really important point as well, that again, thinking back to that experience I had as the medical director of the UK, at that point, very honestly, there was a competitive aspect to the trial, right? There was a competitive aspect to the center. It was, how fast can we start as the center X so we can recruit more, because frankly, a patient in a trial brings financial, brings money to the center. Now, what I'm seeing more and more, thank God, is that there's more of a holistic view. As I say, as we're getting more and more into rare diseases, there's more sharing of this information across centers. So if you like, the whole health system is saying we can recruit so many patients to this particular trial. And that, I hope, will help, Liz, with that communication across centres, so that you don't feel like if you're in Sheffield, I'm not saying I love Sheffield, but that I'm holding on to my patient allocation versus Leeds. Yeah. Maybe that's a problem, but Liz, Emma can talk about that. But just get as an example, Sheffield and Leeds should be working together, even if Sheffield isn't a site. That's what I think we're getting better at, but we need to get much better at that as we go forward.
Also, David, that you could also say that about the pharmaceutical industry, not just recruiting at the different centres, because there's a huge amount of things that should be competitive. Liz, to what you were saying at the beginning, why should patients be going to so many different sources to try and identify a clinical trial solution for themselves? Should there be one holistic, one-shop stop for all the pharmaceutical industry and utilising of the same language?
And for doctors to learn, doctors need to be able to see quickly what trials are available for my patients, because doctors don't know where to look. If you're not at that one conference in the year, or you don't subscribe to that journal, you haven't got a clue.
Well, and increasingly, we're not, people are not going to be at those conferences. So you're absolutely right. We're going to have, because the conference, as you say, is where you sort of bump into your friend who works in Sheffield and you'll say that conversation, but that's not as happening as much now. So
and if you're the person holding the fort, you're the one holding the fort that can't go. Yeah. So it's how we help everybody now.
Exactly.
If I could be so bold, if our chairperson will allow me to, Rosemary, if that's okay, because David has kind of given me an invitation there to comment, and I'd like to comment at this point. Listening to Liz and listening to David is in essence what my job has been since 1996. So I provide a bridge, that communication bridge, between patients and patient groups and pharma. And I think, David, you're happy to say that you are a medical doctor that works within the pharmaceutical industry, right? So that's no surprise. What I heard from both of you rings true, really resonates. So a couple of things that you said, Liz, you mentioned this fear, and that patients with a diagnosis, it's that kind of vagus nerve response, flight, fight, or freeze, which we often forget about. David, you talked about the complexity of clinical trial recruitment. What you both talked about, that's the bridge here, is the emotions, the emotional transaction. So what we know is that there are 4 basic human reactions to anything. That's happiness, anger, fear, and sadness. And that's what a patient faces when they get that diagnosis and then start to consider a clinical trial. Now, the patient movement is not new. We were talking about the HIV communities back in the 90s. Just this week, we've heard on the news that women are meeting in petrol stations to get their HRT, to get their menopause medication. what I'm doing here is providing the link, the bridge between the human emotions that drive patients' thought processes and subsequent actions. If we look at the rare disease communities, David, you've mentioned those a couple of times in the last few minutes. The rare disease communities, and to your point, Liz, that actually clinical trials are for pharma to get data. Patients are going into clinical trials to get hope, to get stuff, to help them. And that's where the disconnect begins. So if you look at the Duchenne's community, for example, those desperate parents knowing, as you said with the breast cancer example, if they get on an early treatment and that doesn't work, they are then excluded from subsequent trials, they will sink that trial program. They will combine in their global network, which is Facebook and the social channels. What the Facebook people are telling us, and they've said it for a long time, is that parents are chief medical officers of their households. So they will go to the channels where they can get the information real time that they want, and they will tell one another, a bit like the HIV trial sinking back in the 90s, don't go on this trial, the efficacy is poor, save yourself, save your child going on to this trial. And what we do as HCPs and what we do in pharma is we ignore that human drive to get help. And it's almost a bad story. It's the elephant in the room that pharma clinical trial program organizers and HCPs don't want to acknowledge, but it is happening. And it's happening every single day. Because basic human emotions will drive the parents of that child with a rare condition. They'll drive that person with a rare cancer condition. They'll drive that person who can't get their menopause meds to take action. And they will do that regardless of the boundaries and the complications in the system. So I'm just going to finish my little rant and let us get back to the subjects. But patient centricity means nothing to patients. It's a pharma trope, it's pharma jargon, and we really need to extinguish that and look at the patient experience. And when we start accepting that patients and their carers will do what needs to be done, then we start to rehumanize human trials.
And to your point, Emma, this goes back again to that human-centered methodology. Start off with the human, not just the patient through the medical lens, really look at everything that's impacting their lives and has done historically and will be in the future, and then build the solutions from that. So if you need to call that a patient centricity, go for that. But it's more than just focusing on a solution that is intermittent, for instance, given a kind of like once every 2 weeks in a given clinical trial. It has to be holistic. Yeah, I completely agree.
Fantastic. Thank you everyone for that. And just staying on this topic of the human aspect and the patient centricity, I completely agree with you, Emma. That means nothing to everyday people, but it is this buzzword. It is what is used in the industry, and we really need to flesh it out and make it practically known what it means and what it is we're doing when we're saying this. And saying that, David, if it's okay to ask, what, from your perspective as a medical leader in the industry, what are your views as to what's required from pharma to understand, and I think in particular incorporate the patient experience, because we're talking about the patient experience, but based on actual patients, what can they do with this real world data, right? And we're talking about understanding patients and their needs. Why the pharmaceutical industry is the last to fully embrace an end user type of consumer-centric mindset is what we're trying to get to, and how can we help move things along in this direction?
Yeah, great question. I'm not going to pretend I know the full answer to this. I've already sort of alluded to the fact that I think it's not, the pharmaceutical industry has been and still is a relatively conservative industry, and has always, as long as I've been doing this, and it's quite some time, witnessed my photograph, which is clearly a long time ago, we've tended to focus very much in terms of key stakeholder as the clinician being the key stakeholder in the decision-making process. Now, obviously, that's developed and evolved over the last 10 years. So thank goodness we are now seeing an appropriate understanding, or attempt to understand other stakeholders, such as the patient more directly, and also the payer more directly, because that is the sort of route, if you like, to help those patients. And you know, one of the big misnomers I always talk about in our industry is this phrase market access. Market access is a misnomer. Market access, the way that it's talked about, people talk about getting, you know, reimbursement. Market access, in my experience, is regulatory approval. All right, that's getting regulatory approval through EMA, through FDA, through even MHRA now in this post-Brexit world. That is access to a market. Reimbursement is patient access. I wish that more companies would change the name of market access to patient access, because ultimately that is the way that we try and get a medicine directly to the patient. We have to go through that extra hurdle. And, you know, we do need to improve, and we need to be, we being the sector, not just the companies, I mean the regulators, we need to be open to listening to what patients are actually saying that are important. Again, we don't have time today, but I could bore you with several stories where a regulator is asking for one particular endpoint, a payer is asking for an entirely different endpoint, and we can't necessarily capture both in the clinical trial. So what do we have to do? Potentially run another clinical trial, or potentially not get that particular asset. And this is terrifying, frankly, for rare diseases, but for all diseases, potentially not commercialize that medicine in some countries that require that. So the sector, not just the companies, not just the pharmaceutical industry, I mean, the sector needs to change. And Rosemary, you mentioned that. And again, it's really important to say that the New England Journal this week has an editorial talking about the FDA push to more actively get a diverse population in the trials, which is appropriate. And it's similarly, we are working more and more between HTA bodies and regulators to try and align the endpoints. But the people that we are not doing enough with yet are the patient groups. There are differences, you know, there are real great stories of patient groups that have been integral to developing medicine. Cystic fibrosis, again, I will not bore you, but I could tell you lots of stories about that. But that population, that patient population, people who've got cystic fibrosis population, and have influenced the sector dramatically. And that's in Europe and in the US. So the key thing is that probably from our side, from the company side, we need to get better at is just being a little bit more thoughtful on time at the beginning. 15 to 20% of studies are successful, right? That's terrible if you think about it. And I think the reason why it's such a low number is because we have to review the protocol and change it. Perhaps if we spend more time at the beginning trying to get the right endpoints, which mean something to the patient, but also to the decision makers, we would improve that success rate. So that's maybe the way we can improve this. Rosemary.
Thank you, David, so much. And I could listen to you forever, honestly, but in the interest of time, I really want us to get to the practical steps and really get down to the nitty-gritty of what can be done. So I'm going to jump really quickly in and ask you, actually, Emma, you know, you're a patient engagement practitioner, you're a leader in this space for many, many years, but what is your practical advice to do this, all this, what we've mentioned today, at scale in drug development?
At scale, well, obviously I'm going to advocate for patient engagement, and patient engagement needs to be an adjuvant therapy in itself, and patient engagement delivers those very pieces of data that David just alluded to. So we've got lots of different measures. We've got PROMs, we've got PREMs, we've got the actual patient activation measure. Regulators are now asking for experience data to be in the regulatory dossiers. So this comes from patient engagement in the pharma industry, I want a systematic infection of patient engagement activities that goes all the way through every aspect of drug development. Now, how do we do that at scale? Well, I want to keep this really simple, and I'm going to give you an ABC. You know, I'm a parent to 4 children, so I have to keep things simple because I've got a very short space of attention here. What we have to do is look at the ABC. So A, we have to address inertia around patient engagement within the pharmaceutical industry. Again, it needs to not be a nice to, but it needs to be practically internalized within the entire system. B, we have to be more bold as an industry. And that speaks to our behaviors and how we interact with patient groups and patients. And C, we have to provide commitment that's enduring to making this a long-standing thing. And by that, I mean, it's the C piece here is cooperativity doesn't just happen by itself. We have to create that cooperativity. So what we have to do as a practical solution is accept that patient engagement is the adjuvant that drives clinical trial recruitment, retention, captures patient data and experience that goes in our regulatory dossiers. Ultimately, patient engagement delivers better outcomes for patients, better business for pharma, and better solutions for society. So I'm not going to go into how to do that right now, but what I'm going to do, if I may, is I'm going to name check the pharma companies that have got patient engagement right, because we need to follow in their footsteps. So I'm thinking of Laura McKeveny, the ex-patient engagement head at Novartis, who made a point of saying patient engagement has a transferable business value. And then the entire infrastructure, even a number of PREMs that should be routinely included in clinical trials, that's when change started to happen. I'm going to name check the guys in Bayer. They created Bridge to Bayer, a digital health program. And there are lots of different examples. Merck are doing fantastic MS in the 21st century. So I think what pharma has to do is that B bit. They have to be more bold, because we have to look at inertia, that's the attitude piece. We have to look at behavior, actually do stuff then, that's enduring. And then we have to reinforce that commitment so that patient engagement isn't just a nice to, it's a business sense that delivers better medicines for patients sooner. And there's every kind of data to prove that patient engagement works. I'm not going to take up any more time on that. It's a subject of another discussion. Mm-hmm. But patient engagement has to be an adjuvant therapy, and it has to be the guiding force for clinical trial change.
Absolutely, Emma. And I think also, though, with that scale aspect of it, it has to be realistic and it has to be representative. So if we are going to be working with patients, they also have to represent the whole entire population, like I said at the very beginning, that is going to be representative of the disease. And I know also from a clinical science perspective, I will say that the challenges we've seen before is that you have a huge voice of medics. You know, from a statistical perspective, there's been a huge kind of like input into what constitutes a real world kind of clinical trials from their viewpoint. What we have done historically is spoken to 5-6 patients in a focus group. That's not going to be statistically viable to go and change our clinical development programs. So this is where that representation and that real world aspect needs to come directly from the patients to be just as strong statistically in our clinical development models.
Absolutely, absolutely, Alex. And in saying that, with a few minutes to go, Erica, I wanted to get your perspective on this. And I hope you don't mind me asking, how can we set the record straight in the time that we have?
There's a solution here. We need this from Erica.
We need you, Erica.
Yeah. What can we do? What can we learn really from the marketing and advertising space to bring over into the clinical trial space and really understand patients as you know, not just one monolith or one profile, but really as individuals. And at Real Chemistry, we use data and analytics to really help us understand patients, their needs, and their motivations on a much deeper level. So we're now using that data to augment things like audience segments that really help us in messaging and supporting and targeting, so we can communicate in a much more personalized way. We're actually at Real Chemistry creating this personalization through omnichannel strategies. And I know omnichannel is sort of the buzzword in pharma marketing at the moment, but there's a very good reason for that, because it really allows us to leverage that data and technology to support our audiences, and in this case, a critical audience of patients, with the right messages at the right moments across the right channels, wherever they are in that journey. And Liz and David both really talked about how patients need to be supported through this journey. It's not just about communicating to them, it's about really supporting them and making sure they have the information that they need. And for us, creating those omni-channel experiences relies on, as I said, right channels working together, creating a unified and seamless experience for that audience that's really as personalized and as targeted as it can be. So in the case of clinical trials, we can develop a program that supports from creating awareness of a trial to screening, then on to enrollment, through to treatment, and all the way through post-treatment follow-up, all based on the data that allows for that much more personalized journey. And I know we were going to talk a bit about behavioral science, which to me is a fascinating area in helping us understand what would even motivate someone to join a clinical trial, and what are some of the things that we can do to help. But I know we're out of time, so that's a subject, a fascinating subject for another time for sure.
Webinar number 2, that's for sure. There's going to be more coming.
Yeah, lots more to talk about.
Yeah. But to your point, the behavioral science is very much intrinsic in the linguistics and the communication science. And I think one of the things that's really come through today, communication, awareness, knowledge, health literacy, all these things are really, really critical in bringing the clinical trial experience to patients, helping support them in that decision framework. To your point, Liz, there's so much already that patient has to deal with, and then the layered effect with regards to a mistrust, misunderstanding about clinical trials is way too much to be asking of patients. I know we're at time. We've had a lot of engagement. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, everybody. And for those of you who've left the notes and the comments, thank you so much. If there's any questions there, we will come back to you. Watch this space for future webinars here from Real Chemistry. David and Liz, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your frank discussions here. Rosemary, Emma, Erica, thank you.